get the land for free. You just pay the cost of the construction. Building more places, people are going into that, opening up other homes for people that are homeless or need another place to go.
Going once, going twice, sold! You're listening to The Property Pod.
All right, guys, welcome back to The Property Pod, your weekly engagement into real estate here in the Hobart and Tasmanian marketplace. It gives me great pleasure to be back on the mic with the boys at the desk, real estate agents here at 414 Property Co, Patrick Berry and John McGregor. Boys, I'm back.
It's good to be back.
Back, baby.
It's good to be back. Thanks for holding down the fort somewhat while I was away.
Well, I was actually listening to your intro, Az, because I was excited to hear you back on the mic. Your weekly engagement, I think we have to say that loosely these days because John and I didn't get too many episodes out while you were gone.
Look, I was actually
The weekly intention.
It was fun being on the other side of the fence and actually being an audience member and not being the guy that edited it, not being the guy that kind of drove the conversation. It was really fun actually being on the other side. So the first 2 weeks, I was like, oh man, I've got a little bit of time on my hand being a fresh father of two. Yes, for anyone out there. New addition into the family was brought into the world, Henry Ronald Horn. 6 weeks old today. But yeah, I was kind of, I've got to rock him to sleep. I'll listen to a podcast. I'll listen to the boys.
Yes.
John has then come into the show and said, I promise next week I'm going to hit the buttons.
Do you know what I love straight off the bat about that, Az? Is that we can put Henry to sleep. That's how quality our show is, it puts newborn babies to sleep.
Just those soothing tones of the voice.
Award-winning and baby rocking.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say I'd actually got him to sleep most of the time.
There's a new market there.
Baby rocking podcast.
Yeah. ASMR. Listen to us talk property and fall asleep. Well, Marcus and Kirsten.
They do, you're right.
But there's proof in the pudding. No, look, it's, I really enjoyed listening the 2 weeks that at the start, and then you guys went and recorded that amazing episode last week with Chris. Absolute cracker. Yeah, what a guy.
Yeah, it was awesome that he reached out, and it was nice to sit and just have a listen to someone who's he's just discovered this obviously years down the road, and it's just become all consuming for him. So it's just the passion that he brings behind it, and obviously with that comes all the study involved as well, which is really cool just to figure out where he's at and what he's doing with it.
Yeah, well, talking about putting people to sleep with podcasts, he definitely didn't fall asleep on the job, just saying that, he had the injury and then he went on to kind of be like, I got deep into podcasts. And actually, when he said the thing about making the little glossary of terms, I can't remember, did he call it microburbs or is there a website? Yeah, I'd never heard of that. So I was like, oh, I'll write down a little glossary of terms. So I actually learnt from Chris straight away, went to that, and there you go. It's retained in my head. So thank you, Chris, for that just as a jumping off point. But so passionate. And as he said, he was in the hole 40 grand or something like that at some stage. And then, so it's not like he's come from this place of entitlement and just being like, oh, here's everything on a silver platter. He's, worked, and obviously a well-researched and pragmatic guy who's said, I'll drive the 7 hours a day. Yeah, it was an awesome episode. If you haven't listened, go back and listen to that one. Just another perspective of investment and how you can get into the property market.
Well, I think what's exciting is Chris seems pretty keen to become almost like an honorary fourth member of the team here at the podcast. So I think you guys will start to hear a fair bit more of him over the coming months.
I actually really liked the idea when you said a super episode with him and Simon Presley. I was just like, friends of the pod. Imagine those two guys bounce. We probably wouldn't have to talk.
No. We'll just let it go and walk away.
Like a takeover episode.
Yeah.
No, look, shout out, as I said, anybody that hasn't listened, go back and check out last week's episode. And if you want to see some funny button pressing, go back to the two before that. And,
Look, I'm so glad I'm just back here sitting behind the microphone this week, Az, because your job's shit. I hate it.
Well, pay rise, baby, pay rise. Bring it on. We're back in action. It's really good to be back. Let's jump into some property stuff today. It was funny being away from real estate and being away from the offices. It's kind of interesting just taking a step back and seeing how things are on the other side. A lot of the articles that were coming through while I was away and just kind of still pricking my ears was this kind of affordability, how people really want to get into homes, and we're in a lucky position where we bought our home at a good time, and the price of it now, I wouldn't be able to afford getting into the market where I am if I was looking to buy now. So affordability and trying to get, especially this podcast, we want first home buyers out there to get a chance to get into a home. it was just one of those problems where I was just like, well, how can we help people with this? How can we kind of talk around affordability and people trying to enter the market space?
And look, it's a huge problem, not just here in Hobart, but right across Australia. Like my mum and dad came back from the Gold Coast last week, and there's 2 hotels up there, brand new, never been lived in. So I think there's nearly 400 or 500 rooms sitting vacant up there. But yet there's so many people that haven't got a house to live in at the moment.
Yeah.
And all the news articles and all these people are out there saying, well, why can't they, temporarily live in these hotels that are not actually operational and being used?
Yeah.
They're just giant accommodation towers that are doing nothing. And so it's definitely a problem, I think, which is right across the country. And yeah, been interesting to put some show notes together about some potential ideas the government could implement to help fix the problem.
Yeah, and obviously, like, these aren't like hard and fast things that are definitely going to work. Like, we can't get on our podcast and solve the affordability problem. We're not trying to say that in any way,
But if
shape,
you
or
listen in
form.
ScoMo, we're here to help.
Exactly.
I think he's got his ukulele out. He's he's busy just repping some April Sun in Cuba. All right, home ownership figures. Let's talk about. I've got a stat here that in 1981, more than 60% of young Australians aged between 25 and 34, so just out of our age bracket. Man, that's crazy. That's just out of us. We used to be right on the cusp of that 34. They owned a home. So the latest census figures show from 2016 that's dropped to under 45%. So it's a drastic drop of people who have owned homes, and it doesn't seem like it's getting any easier.
If anything,
moving
it's
forward.
probably getting harder to a degree.
And that seems to be the reports that kind of pricked my ears into this. It seems to be a tricky thing to be able to get into the market, especially with prices rising. They don't seem to be slowing. From everything we've heard, things are still going to keep going up. So how can you get into the market?
Well, I guess and that's where it's interesting. I think I remember looking at this little snippet of an article that said, housing affordability, like in the 50s, 40s or something. So it's not like it's not ever been a consistent talking point. But that element now where it's showing that gap of actual home ownership is getting further and further and further away for first home buyers, that definitely is concerning, because the access on that and the trend of what that means for new people, for young people, certainly is not good. Obviously it's going to be harder.
And look, it's just not the cost of houses increasing; it's the fees that come along with buying the home as well.
Yeah.
Like a lot of purchases, we've talked about it before. Stamp duty. People forget that that's a fee that they have to pay when they buy a house.
Oh, indeed.
And it's worked out on how expensive the home is. So as the homes get more expensive, stamp duty gets more expensive.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so once you might have been paying $10,000 stamp duty, for most homes in Glenorchy now, you're probably up to $15,000 or $20,000 to be able to secure a home on top of the purchase price.
Exactly.
Which is a huge chunk out of your deposit, or like getting this,
or getting under your 80% LVRs to avoid mortgage insurance is near impossible these days.
Yeah, so you can, if you're lucky, you can withdraw from the bank of mum and dad if they're around to help, or you've got someone to help back you. But if not, you're there again. And as we've said, it's that spreading that time of where, I've hit my mark where my deposit should be. Oh no, I still need another 15 grand, so that's another year on top of my savings, which then the prices may have jacked up again, and so you're always chasing that.
You're chasing your tail.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And for a lot of first home buyers, I don't even think they realise that stamp duty exists. So
I
they get
had no
all
idea about
excited.
it. Yep.
They're like, they use the online calculator on one of the bank's websites, and it says, I earn this much money, so therefore I can borrow X. And then they go and check what the repayments on there. Like, yep, I can handle that. They get all excited on realestate.com, and first time they go to visit an open home, the agent says, have you been pre-approved? No. So we send them down that journey, and then they get hit with this $20,000 fee or $15,000 fee that they had no idea that they even needed to account for. And then all of a sudden that dream of owning the home just seems impossible.
Yeah. Well, and then, it pushed you back further. And so, this idea of the younger or the poorer side of society are kind of, getting left behind. And how can we move forward and help them get into the property market? So there's 2 kind of proposals that we saw come up in the news. I think ABC News, I found 2 articles. One was the federal government share house scheme. I thought maybe John or Pat, you guys could take the lead and kind of go into what that is. And then there was another one that was kind of a model from Singapore that economists maybe put forward.
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
you go first.
Well, the share house scheme had actually already happened quite a lot in Tasmania.
Okay.
So the
Tassie leading the way.
that's it, where effectively the government would go into 30% ownership of the property. Often where they'll build the homes, it's eligible only to first home buyers exclusively, and they have to live within that house for a certain amount of time. And and then if they're ever to sell the home, they have to pay back that which was invested from the government. So with the 30%, let's just say at the time we had a large development at Chiggle once before on the site of an old school, and the prices at the time I think were around about say 260, 280,000. And so the government would front 30% of that, which ends up being that you'd own maybe $180,000 of this property.
Yep.
Then, as those values increased, so did the value for both the homeowner and the government share as well. And so, if I think at the time you had to put, actually that's right, they contribute 50 grand. But if there was a profit ever to be made on the sale, the profit belongs to both the owner and the government. So you end up being a co-owner with the government.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so on the title, it's, your name plus the Housing Tasmania, I think it was.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. As the house went up in value, the government got their share of the profit and loss as well. But if the house went down in value...
I was going to say, so what happens with loss?
Yeah, same thing. Government took the loss, took the hit. You don't have to pay them back. It's all part of the risk involved in the scheme.
Sure.
And that's exactly what this Brendan Coates from the Grattan Institute is proposing for an Australia-wide scheme.
Yep.
He's suggesting what actually Tasmania's been doing for quite some time now.
Yeah, because you're still doing the same with was it the Centre Care Evolve program? It effectively still functions the same way, doesn't it, mate?
Yeah, pretty much. So it's all about first home ownership. There's a few less people involved in that scenario. But yeah, the key thing here is that by the government pitching in 30% on this scheme, it means that, if a purchaser's got enough for the stamp duty component, the government put the 30% for the actual purchase price in, then they're only borrowing 70% of the price of the property, and then they can avoid mortgage insurance and the extra fees that come along with that. And it puts them in a safer position from a lending perspective as well. So it means that if, something did go wrong and it had to be sold, or, you did go bankrupt, the bank feels better about it because, they've got 30% of the house paid for. So all the risk is taken by the government in this scenario.
Yeah, and so just with this one that's running in Tassie and the proposal, what happens with the interest on? Is there interest on that 30% that the government?
No.
So that's kind of another windfall that you kind of get in front of.
Your monthlies become cheaper. Because you're not borrowing 100%. You're only borrowing less money. So you're not paying as much interest and as much repayments each month.
I think what's interesting about those too is that the obviously it's limited to a certain selection of people. So I look at that as that's reduced competition as well for those people that are looking to get into it.
For sure.
Not to say that's a good or a bad thing, but where often the real challenge is, and that's where they will argue against negative gearing, for example, is that with that application, or that option, investors have a distinct advantage against first-home buyers when it comes to purchasing.
Of course.
And so by these schemes, like just putting a nice little blanket over here, is like, this is where you guys can be and compete without the rest of the influence of the market. So like coming in and just completely beating you out of, completely taking you out of the run.
It's like showing up at like a tennis court and like the club pros just like, I'm just going to whoop you. I'm going to clean the floor with you and sucked in. That's like, there's no way of like working your way up to, it's like me going to compete in the Australian Open basically. Just being like, I'm expecting to win, but I've got to play Rafael Nadal,
and just it doesn't happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I know there was a friend of mine had recently sold his house out of the scheme that he'd got into with that same Jiggle development some time ago, and it's worked out really well for him.
Okay, so you actually have real world kind of an example of this, like someone you knows.
There was a few people that I know bought into that same development, and at the time, I think it was about 50 grand or so that they were contributing to those houses. So there's none of them were able to afford a house otherwise, except aside from getting into that scheme. And he'd lived in there for several years. Eventually, converted into an investment property, and that's since sold. And he's got another property now. Another friend of mine, she was well into her 40s at the time, and she'd never owned a home, and then because of that scheme, was able to get into that development as well.
Yeah, cool.
So it's the same because she'd been a single mother, like for most, she'd been a single mum, so had never been able to establish herself financially well enough to build that giant deposit that people need.
Yep.
So by that deposit being taken care of, she could then absolutely afford the repayments. But it's always that initial outlay that seems to be the biggest challenge for first-time buyers.
I have also sold a couple of these homes for a few people, and it has made me laugh at different times because the time comes to sell, and then they're gently reminded that the government owns 30% of the house because they don't see it that way. And then when the profit gets figured out and the government gets to take 30% of the profit, I have had a few owners that are whinging and complaining, the government's taking all our money. I'm like, well,
the only reason why you only
got into the house because they helped you to begin with, and you signed the deal saying that you agreed to pay them 30% of any profit. So,
it's I guess it feels like a hard pill to swallow, but it's you've got your leg up, and you just have to remember that your little ladder that got you there is helpful, and it's that really tricky part of kind of, I wouldn't be here without it, so I need to remember that.
Exactly right. Let's say there's $100,000 profit. You're walking away with 70. The government gets an extra 30. Well, that's 70 you never had.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we need to remember that.
It really is interesting where our moral high horse, I suppose, can quickly disappear the second that money's involved. It's like, there would be, it's so important that I got this and it's really great. And then right at the other end is like, now I've got money that's coming in the back end. It's like, I can't believe I've got to pay all that back. Just completely forgot about the gift that was passed on initially.
Yeah.
So, look, we've been talking about how it is set in Tasmania at the moment and has been up and running. This particular person is suggesting that it becomes a federal scheme and goes Australia-wide.
Yeah.
He has put a couple of limitations on it. The purchaser has to have at least a 5% deposit to put towards the government's 30%, and that they have to be earning incomes below 60,000 if you're a single, or 90,000 if you are combined. So he's also stipulating that it's designed to help people get into the marketplace that would struggle in other means.
Yes.
So, which that's good in some ways, but I would have thought 60, 90 in today's marketplace, 90 for a combined.
Yeah,
is anyone going to actually be able to afford to buy a house on a combined
like
income of 90 at the moment?
The way rental prices are as well, it's kind of hard, because I know people paying more on their rent than I am on my mortgage sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky.
And I guess it always comes down to the way that they do the means testing, which is 25 to 30% of your income. So ultimately, if the mortgage repayments exceed that, their means test, well, then it isn't an option anyway. And that obviously it's a difficult number to massage through, because that, depending upon the area, will obviously change again. $60,000 in one area is worth a lot less than $60,000 in another.
Exactly. I can't imagine like a Melbourne suburb, even those outer suburbs that are, an hour out of the city that people commute to, that even still working on that scenario, it's probably still too expensive.
Yeah. Well,
so it's probably more your regional towns that this is currently aimed towards.
But potential areas that do need that population increase.
Yeah.
I guess I just think that it is interesting concept in the sense that it is exclusively to first home buyers only. So it's just one bracket that are competing against each other and not against the wider market.
Yeah.
Which I think is an interesting idea.
Well, I think that's a perfect point to pivot across to the next scheme.
Yeah, so this one's a Sydney economist, Cameron Murray, recently put forward a proposal. He called it Housemate. It's got a cool, catchy name. It's loosely modelled on the Singapore's Housing Development Board program, which houses more than 4 in 5 of the city-state's residents. So,
which straight off the bat, that's crazy.
That's heaps. That's
yeah. So it's 8 out of every 10 houses are done in Singapore by the HDB. So the Singapore Housing Development Board, which is a massive amount of property that the government's involved with over there.
Well, I suppose too, like they're old giant sky rises.
Yeah.
Well, there's no land. Like it's just like an island like this. Yeah. So it's just got to be like, there's no land, so we've got to go up.
Just got to go up. And like it's owned by the country. Like we go up.
Yeah. So what makes this scheme interesting and how it works in Singapore is that the Singaporean people, so the owners of the property, actually dip into their version of superannuation that we have here in Australia to be able to afford the deposit and also part of the repayments. So they are like it allows them to get into the marketplace by using some of their super that they already have saved. So the argument, I guess, is that, you know, you've got all this super money tied up sitting in an account. Is it better to use some of that today to get into the market to better your financial position later when you retire versus leaving it there
waiting
until
till you're there and you actually haven't earned any, like
with the way property prices continue to rise, you've got opportunities there to make more value out of that super than it just sitting in an account until you're, 70 or something.
And living rough until you get to that 70 and then be like, oh, I've had a pretty rough life to get to this super and now I can't even actually enjoy it with my own home.
Yeah, because I'm paying a stupid amount of money in rent.
So, Cameron is suggesting that potentially here in Australia we could develop a similar style scheme where it helps people that are disadvantaged or not in a position to be able to buy a house traditionally use some of that equity that they have in their super to be able to get a foot in the door into the marketplace.
Well, and this was an interesting point too, is that they would also have to live in the home for at least 7 years, and after that they could either sell it to another person eligible for the housemate scheme or pay a 15% premium back to the government because you're going to sell it to someone else. So it's obvious it's trying to keep someone within the cycle in that sense, so you will get the benefit of capital gain. Is sort of the way I suppose you could look at it from that changeover element.
And look, the other things that form part of it, so in Singapore they do it on reclaimed land, so that's where, you pump sand and dirt into the ocean and you make your country larger from land that doesn't exist. But the way they're suggesting it here is that the government uses some of their surplus land that is still owned by them and almost give it to the country or to the people for free to be able to get in. It also proposes that having an incredibly low interest rate finance of only 1.1% to cover the mortgage repayments to make it incredibly cheap. So I guess what they're trying to do is make it, like you just described, John, almost cheaper to own the home than it is to rent in the current marketplace. So and that way they can get a lot of people out of the rental and the housing department projects into home ownership where they can actually start to create wealth.
Well, I guess more homes for the more people that kind of, it sounds crazy to compare Singapore to Australia, but like land size-wise, we have land everywhere. Like we're spoilt for land, but we should be spoilt for dwellings. Like there should be ways of... Actually, I was going to talk... Next week we might cover off on kind of... We've spoken about medium density dwelling and stuff like that. There was an email that came through recently about...
from the Glenorchy Council. It would be a good topic to flow to next week.
Yeah, I reckon kind of going from there, because speaking of kind of where can we... Like building up, Singapore's building up, like is that something that needs to be done here? But yeah, there's plenty of land here. So I guess that urban sprawl might have to kind of grow out. But... Like essentially, like reading this thing here, it's kind of saying, get the land for free. You just pay the cost of the construction. Building more places, people are going into that, opening up other homes for people that are homeless or need another place to go.
You're going to have some people out there say, well, why should someone get land for free? Well, the government's going to build a property on that land anyway and then put people into social housing where they don't pay a huge amount of rent anyway. Is it better to give that land away to somebody, and then that creates generational wealth for that family, and that because eventually someone is going to pass away, that wealth that's been created gets passed back down through, and is that a better option than just having a continuous cycle of social housing?
I don't even have an answer to that. Really, it's
definitely an interesting concept, that's for sure.
Yeah, I know like at the end it says the expected problems always is that availability of land. And I suppose, well, like you said with the Singapore example, it's reclaimed land. So even from a private funding element, it would probably never happen. So that combined investment from creating something that doesn't even exist is very different than having to reclaim, either take over space or repurpose the space that may not even need to be used for housing in the first place. That's obviously a real distinct problem from Australia. And I guess the other thing too, I suppose like we just touched on, we'll talk about next week, is that the urban design of Australia is probably not current with what Australia now needs in the future. So that consistent separation, single dwelling, urban sprawl just does not suit the future. And so it really has to have that reimagining before any project like this would start.
Which I'm excited because, as Aaron has mentioned, Glenorchy Council has got some thoughts around that.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be a great episode for us to pivot to next week, potentially talk about.
Yeah, well, look, I've had a great time being back in the studio. It's been really fun. I think I've got the buttons pretty much down pat here, Pat, so I don't know what you're talking about. It's not that hard. It's
I just always think it'd be cool if it was like a Nintendo Power Glove, so you could just sit there and
imagine just being
rather than having to use your thumb, you just be like, that a particular camera is connected to a particular finger.
That sounds kind of like Minority Report as well. Kind of like I'll swipe to John and swipe to over here. No, look, boys, it's great to be back. Well done holding down the fort while I was away. I think last week's episode with Chris was one of my favourites. As I said, if you haven't listened, go back and do it. I'll keep spruiking that one because it is a cracker. Awesome to be back. Thanks for being back in here, and we'll be back next week with another cracking episode of The Property Pod.
Awesome.
You have been listening to The Property Pod, recorded and edited by 414 Media House in conjunction with 414 Property Code.
This podcast is general information only, and the thoughts and views expressed is the opinion of our panel, and listeners should always seek and use their own investigation into any topic we discuss to ensure they fully understand their own situation.
It does not constitute and should not be relied on as purchasing, selling, financial or investment advice or recommendations, express or implied, and it should not be used as an invitation to take up any agent or investment services. No investment decision or activity should be undertaken on the basis of this information without first seeking qualified and professional advice.